Do you have a burning urge to write fantasy? Well, I did, and I do. And I thought I'd share those tips with you. Writing fantasy, an imp's journey. Hello, and welcome to the Bottled Imp, exploring the realms of fantasy. My name is Ken Boyter, and today we're going to do something slightly different. We thought it'd be good to share with you my journey of writing a book. So this is going to be like hints, tips and advice on how to speak. Not how to speak, how to write. And specifically writing fantasy, because I have written a book called The Legends of Grimous Ironblood. And I'm no expert in writing. This is my first foray into publishing. Now I've decided to self-publish. And I thought it'd be a good idea to kind of share that journey with you, because I'm going to take you right from how do you get ideas and inspiration and why should you write, all the way through to getting your book printed and published, and also the tricky end if you're self-publishing like me, the marketing. How are you going to sell your book? So as I say, I'm no expert. I just thought it'd be nice to share the journey, which is why I've called it Writing Fantasy, an Imp's Journey. Now, it's not going to replace the regular Friday show. We're still going to do lots of reviews of board games, films, books, etc., and eventually other types of shows. This is just going to be coming out as and when. So we hope you enjoy it. Anyway, let's start where all good stories start, and that's at the beginning. Writing fantasy. Well, the big question that I always ask myself is, why do I write? What's the point? Why am I writing? Now, if you think you're going to be writing for fame and money, well, that's not necessarily the best answer to give. I started writing way back. Probably the earliest thing I remember writing are little short stories when I was at primary school. In fact, I found a whole bunch of them in the loft the other day, and you know, they were really cute. I really enjoyed them, and it brought loads of happy memories back for me. And I do remember writing lots of things at school, and really love the sort of creative aspect of writing a story, just something that comes from nowhere and then it ends up on the page, and hopefully somebody reads it and they enjoy it. So that to me is the main motivation. If you think that you're going to write the next bestseller and you're going to make loads of money and going to be famous, well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but the odds of that are very slim. But that shouldn't put you off. You should be writing because you love writing and it makes you happy. Because I find it very satisfying, and I find it's its own reward, just that aspect of being creative. So therefore, I would just ask, what are your motivations for writing? And to me, it's to be happy. So that then leads on to the next question, where to start? What should you be writing about? Now, there is that old saying, write what you know. And I remember thinking, well, okay, I know about school. Fair enough. But I remember thinking, I don't really want to write about my humdrum life. Now, there are people out there that have written very well and very entertaining and very profound stories about everyday things. Alan Bennett springs to mind. But to me, that's not me. That isn't what I particularly want to write about. And I think that's one of the main factors. What do you find interesting? What is your passion? So writing what you know doesn't have to be about everyday life, because then I suddenly thought, well, I like writing about magic and dragons and that fantasy world. And I thought, actually, I do know about that. I've read quite a lot of books about it, you know, fantasy novels, and even how to write fantasy books. So I felt, yeah, I know this I do also know this. So writing what you know isn't just about real life, it's also about the fictional life that you know as well. So if you've read loads of crime books, you're going to know a lot about crime fiction. So again, if you write what you know, but also what you love, that is a really good combination to do. So then that kind of leads on to, well, how do I get the ideas? How do I get the inspiration? And because, you know, some people, when I say, I've written this, and they always say, well, where did you get your idea from? How do you get those ideas? And to me, I've always found it fairly easy. The short answer for me was just everywhere. But the key is being in tune with when ideas kind of hit you. Because you can have an idea, and if your brain isn't tuned in to kind of being aware that it's an idea, then you're going to miss it. And so once you get into the habit of making sure that you write down ideas, then your brain kind of tunes into it. Well, it does for me anyway. So one of the key things I found is that when you have an idea and you think, oh, that'd be a really good idea, write it down. If even if it's on your phone, or carry a book, pen and paper, write it down, because ideas can be very, very fleeting. In fact, that happened to me a couple of weeks ago. I had this really good idea, and I think I was out and about, and I stupidly didn't write it on my phone. Now I can't remember what it was, and I really, really at the time thought it was an excellent idea. Hopefully it'll come back to me. So there we are with ideas, but then you kind of think, well, sometimes you're not in the mood, and how do you get yourself into that way, into that space of letting the ideas in, because you can encourage them to come. I found that quite a lot, and for me it was always about just being in a space where your mind isn't anxious. I've always found that works. So I started to think about this, and I thought, actually, yeah, there are various ways that you can inspire ideas to pop into your head. And I've got 8 of them here. Obviously there's going to be more. Some might work for you, some might not. For me, one of the best ways of generating ideas is visiting places of beauty or that you love. And that might be 2 different things. But for example, I love churches, I love cathedrals, I love anything medieval in that respect. So I'm very fortunate. I live close to churches that are very old and ancient. I love that type of feel. And so I just go walking around there, and I don't necessarily go inside them. Sometimes I can if they're open. But just being in that space, I just generate some beautiful ideas. And again, remember to write them down. Playing your favourite music, that always works. For me, it's instrumental. It has to be instrumental. It can't be lyrics, because if I'm writing or if I'm trying to get ideas, I find the lyrics kind of cloud my ideas. They kind of fill my head up. Whereas the music, instrumental music, really just puts me in that frame of mind. Now, I love listening to Skyrim. I love the video game, and when I put that music on, it really inspires me. It really takes me back into playing the game. Lord of the Rings type music, that for me really works. Obviously, it doesn't have to be fancy if that's not your thing, but yeah, playing music, that's a real good way to get in your mind in the right frame. Also, having your own room, or a space in a room, if you haven't quite got enough rooms, that is just kind of for you and your writing, and that's your place where you write. And obviously you're creating a space that allows you to be you, and you don't feel vulnerable, you feel very safe, very cozy. And that to me also, like I really like writing just on the couch with a blanket and a cup of tea. It's very basic, put some music on. But I find that really, really is conducive to writing and having ideas. Some people like going to cafes. I've got that down here as well. And again, sometimes I do that because sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of hubbub in the background, a little bit of noise, and that interaction. And you can just kind of watch people and get ideas from that. They might fascinate you the way they're talking to someone else, and that might spark, actually, if I had 2 characters and one was a bit secretive, it can just generate ideas. Libraries, they're a nice quiet space, and again, you're surrounded by books, so you could go and read books. I've also found that really helps. If I'm reading lots of books that I'm interested in, again, that can inspire you. You're not necessarily copying them, but you get inspired because you're soaking up the same type of atmosphere. Non-fiction books and also watching documentaries, I found that immensely helpful. I love watching documentaries about castles and anything medieval, basically. And also other cultures. So find documentaries that you're interested in. They can spark some great ideas, as well as non-fiction books. And then I've put here rather pretentiously, just exist. What I mean by that is just daydream. Just let yourself not worry about anything and not, I better be rushing off. Give yourself time. It could just be an hour a day. Go for that walk. But daydream, let your mind wander. And what you're doing is you're then allowing the ideas to fill up your mind. And again, the last thing here, and I've been mentioning this because it's happened to me so many times when I didn't do this. Take a notebook, write stuff down, even if it's in your phone. So the next stage is then, you know, I've got all these ideas and you can write them all out and then you'll be staring at them and you think, well, where do I start? And I like writing with a pen and a bit of paper. I'm not too keen straight away going straight to the computer. That's just a personal thing. I like the feel of a bit of paper and I can cross it out and I can doodle. And again, that allows me to be in a relaxed frame of mind. But then you kind of think, well, what do I do with all these ideas? Where do I begin? Should it be the characters? Should it be the story? Should it be the plot? You know, should it be trying to create the fantasy world? Well, it all depends. And I think it depends on which story as well. I've written stories where I've started with the character. I've written stories where I've started with the actual story. But for me, I started, I'll give you an example actually, the Legends of Grimous Ironblood, which is a children's book that I'm writing at the moment, what I've written, and it's now in its illustration stage. And my good friend Rich Nan, if that's, I can never pronounce his surname, in fact he told me off just the other day, he's illustrating it and he's at that process now, but I'm just about to start the next book, because once I've written one book, I start the next book, because I'm still in that frame of mind, and it means that I can carry on in the writing process. And so I read a non-fiction book, it's a reference book, which is this one here. It's quite a big book actually. It's called Encyclopedia of Things That Never Were. And this is a fantastic reference book. And I found a lovely little short story that was called The Bottled Imp. And obviously, shows the Bottled Imp with a D on the end. You can see where we got that from. I love that story. And then I researched it and I realised that Robert Louis Stevenson had already come in and written a short story about it. But there was an aspect of it. I loved the fact there was a bottle that went from one character to the next character. And that to me was the start of my story. Just that concept. It wasn't any characters, it wasn't any plot. It was just the concept of a bottle being passed to another person. And then I started asking questions about that. Who owns the bottle? Where did they get the bottle from? How did they get the bottle? And then I started to sketch that out. And then once I'd done that, I started to create the fantasy world. So I started to create magic and, you know, what's the political situation, you know, where, and then the plot slowly came. But we'll go into a lot more detail about all of that in other episodes. And then the other bit of advice I'd just say for this episode, finally, the last little chunk of advice, is read good reference books on how to write. It doesn't necessarily just how to write fantasy, but just how to write in general, because a lot of it is transferable. Now, I've got these, when I read this, The Complete Guide to Writing Fantasy, Volume 1, this really helped me. And in fact, I pretty much just finished. Well, there we go. The postman has just arrived. Hopefully, that's a contract for my next publishing gig. It probably won't be. It's probably junk mail. Oh well. But yeah, so I was reading this, The Complete Guide to Writing Fantasy. Now, I'd pretty much finished my first or second draft. And I looked at this and there were some useful hints and tips in here, and I rewrote bits and I added more depth to my book. And again, we're going to do an episode on fantasy books. Now, there's 3 volumes in this series, but that's just one series. There's loads of other fantasy, how to write fantasy books out there. I recommend that you start reading them now. And the other thing I would say is read as much fantasy as you can, because you'll get absorbed into those worlds. Now, I'm not saying copy people, don't copy people, but be inspired by them. If you want to write fantasy, you need to live in that world. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found that of interest and useful. That's kind of the purpose of it, and maybe a little bit entertaining too. Remember, read as much as you can, and the next episode is actually going to be all about creating your fantasy world. So remember, until the next time, keep it unreal, especially if you're writing fantasy.